Purpose of the press conference is to lay out in further detail where the administration is coming from with regard to the President's stimulus package and our take with regard to South Carolina and what we think we ought to be doing with a significant portion of those stimulus dollars is contemplated in the bill. If you cut to the chase, the simple message from our end is that we don't think it's a good idea to spend money that you don't have. We don't think it's a good idea to spend money that you don't have at a personal level. We don't think it's a good idea to spend money that you don't have at a state government level, or for that matter, a federal level. And that fundamentally, if you boil down what the stimulus would mean for South Carolina, it means we would go through the process of spending a bunch of money that we don't have, and there would be a price to be paid 24 months from now when those funds dry up. A very significant price, totaling $1.2 billion in South Carolina, because we would dig for ourselves a $1.2 billion annualization hole going forward. And the question at that point, though I wouldn't be here to answer it, would be how exactly do we fill that hole? Do we raise taxes? Do we significantly cut benefits? What do we do? And so what we've done is to say we think that that's a mistake. On the portion of the monies that we control, which is about 25% of the total, what we're going to do, and a letter will go out later this afternoon, to the Obama administration, laying out both our concerns and a request for a waiver that would allow us to take that money and allocate it to paying down South Carolina debt that's accrued over the years. We think that that would be a better use of the money for the stronger financial footing it would put our state in what are the most uncertain of economic times. I would also say this. If you use GM as an example, you know, what we were told a number of months ago is if they just got the money, then they would be okay, and yet literally a matter of weeks later, they come back and say, if you don't give us billions of dollars more, we're going to be faced with this notion of bankruptcy. They didn't basically make the tough choices that had to be made, and as a consequence, they're right back asking for the federal government for help. We think that at some level, what these, quote, stabilization funds do is destabilize the economy of South Carolina for the way that we are not forced to make restructuring decisions that have everything to do with the long-term competitiveness of our state. Let me walk you through just a couple of charts, just because those of you who know me know how much I love charts. And I've asked for your forbearance and patience on that one. What we're talking about is this, about 75, not including tax cuts. If you include tax cuts, you're looking at about $8 billion, you know, of total financial impact to South Carolina. So not including the whole of tax cuts and the stimulus package itself, but just focusing on the stimulus package. What you're looking at here, or the financial part of the stimulus package out of Washington, D.C. What you're looking at here is about 75% of the funds would not be impacted, 75.3 to be exact. That means highway funding, that means things like Medicaid, that means food stamps, workforce training, IDA funds, Title I funds, etc., would continue to flow through as they do now. Most other governors across this country have set up, for instance, governing councils to look at how that other 25% though ought to be spent. Now, there's clearly a distinction between those funds and the 25% based on the actions of other governors. And so we look at that 20, to be exact, 24.7%, and say, all right, that's the part which we think we have some level of impact and control. Our proposal, again, is to ask for the waiver from the federal government to allocate that toward debt. The reason we think that that's so important in doing is that if you look at state government debt per person, South Carolina ranks #1 in the entire Southeast by a fairly considerable margin when measured against some other states. And that debt, I see a number of younger folks back in this corner, will be borne by young folks across our state in the form of either reduced benefits or raises in taxes. If you look at our overall liabilities, they have, in essence, mushroomed over the last couple of years. We've gone from being a little over $3 billion to being right at $20 billion since 1999, which is not that long ago. If you look at the top 125 pension funds across the United States of America, South Carolina ranks 106 in the degree to which we're funded. So a lot of states out there are 110 or 100% of funding. In other words, they'll be able to meet the obligations that they promised to firemen and policemen, state workers, etc. South Carolina won't. We're 69.6% funded. And those numbers are dropping every year based on the performance of the stock market as we're seeing that the markets unfold. So we have very significant liabilities on that front that will need to be addressed. And the big problem is this. If you borrow from Peter to pay Paul, you still owe Peter. And the issue with the annualization hole in terms of giving some sense of scale is it is completely out of balance with anything that we've seen over the last 10 years. Because if you look here, just to give a scale, annualizations have been running, let's call it in the $200 to $300 million range. The annualization in this year's budget, if you take and spend all this stimulus money rather than using it to pay down debt, would be $740 million, a number that we've not seen in South Carolina. Who's going to pay back that $740 million? And next year, based on the stimulus package, it'd be a little over $500 million added to that to get you to the total of $1.2 billion. So from the standpoint of the hole that would be dug financially going forward, we do not believe it is in South Carolina's best interest to take these funds in the way that was suggested. One other point. That's why we're doing it from a state standpoint. But it is worth looking at the federal point because some folks at the federal level have been critical of the decision that we've laid out. If solving economic crises was simply let me say it in English. If solving an economic crisis was as simple as writing checks for money that you don't have in the bank, then all kinds of problems would be solved on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis, at an individual business and government level. I mean, you look at the inflation that's going on in Zimbabwe right now, it's because there is a consequence to printing money that you don't have. And you know, across the pages of financial history, we've seen that cost. If you look at our debt numbers, they have spiraled as a country. As a consequence, you've got David Walker, the past Comptroller General of the United States of America, traveling the country on what he calls a fiscal wake-up tour, saying that what we're on, the course we're on, is absolutely unsustainable. And those costs will be borne in one of two ways. They will either be borne by the next generation saddled with significant debts that they will have to pay, or they will be borne more immediately in the crashing of a dollar. Because if you print enough of anything long enough, you devalue it. You make it not worth as much. And so if you look at Argentina in the 1920s and what happened to the currency, if you look at the Weimar Republic between World War I and World War II and what happened to their currency, there are plenty of examples across time where if you go to the point where we're going, there is a consequence. Because there is no free lunch. You can't just print money and pretend that it has value if there isn't something out there that is sustainable from the standpoint of the why on how you can print that money. So our debt to GDP numbers, these do not include Social Security and Medicare, which are taking us up over 400%, suggest that doing what we're doing is a problem and that this probably won't work and it'll probably have significant consequences that come with it. And we are at a very different spot. Oftentimes people use the 1930s as an example and say, look, they cranked up the printing presses, they borrowed a bunch of money, but consider where we are. In 1930, government debt as a percentage of overall economy, GDP, was 17%. Today we're at 96%. What that means in, I guess, human terms is if you had a mortgage on your house that was worth 17% of the house, could you refinance and put a little bit more debt on that house and probably not get in all that much trouble and have some elbow room in doing so? Yeah. But if all of a sudden your mortgage was 100% of the value of your house, how much elbow room do you have? You do not have the same amount of elbow room. We're at a very different point in financial history than we were in 1930.